minutes. 40 minutes with traffic. Okay. So then we went ahead one more level. We saw the traffic in India. And tell me who didn't think that was chaotic. Even though that's how it is, every single day. And I didn't show you videos where they have animals in there. Right? You know, some animals are sacred, so they have to go around them and they just create chaos. But that's part of the ecosystem. And then we saw the part of China, Beijing in particular, with all the infrastructure, but again, a more serious problem. So we're talking about the same thing, looked at it from different perspectives. So let me ask you now, like, if you compare the scenario in Washington versus the scenario in Beijing, which one would you consider a traffic jam?
Beijing.
So what's driving your opinion about the subject? Your own experience, the context around you. So, in order to understand lean, we need to know where that comes from. If these words. So what is the culture behind lean? So the first question we asked ourselves is, okay, lean is coming from Toyota Production Systems, and Toyota Production Systems comes from Japan. So what were the characteristics of Japan? What were the characteristics that drove Toyota to create this system? So we have that Japan, you know, had a couple of atomic bombs dropped at, and they were in prosperity and they had to recover from the damage very quickly, right? And you have limited resources in Japan. You have an island with a lot of people, so how could you say that a country that is so small at some point was the second most productive country in regards to gross domestic product in the world? Now it's third, just surpassed by United States and China. So how is that possible? What do we need to understand behind that? So that's the two things that are behind lean. First, lack of resources. When we talk about identifying waste, why do we need to identify waste if there is no need to identify waste, right? But when you don't have space to put inventories in, when you don't have the luxury to throw materials away, then when you start thinking about it. So that originated the principles behind lean. Then I had the fortune to meet one of the engineers. Again, if you read the book, the paper, you know about NUMMI, right? So who remembers NUMMI? Who remembers what NUMMI is? No one? No one remembers what NUMMI is in the paper? NUMMI, I'll show you a picture eventually. It's the new United Motor Manufacturing International. It's international, right? Which is the joint venture between Toyota and General Motors. All right? So I had the fortune to visit a presentation of lean. It was kind of a conference a whole weekend, and we sat through the presentation of Yoshino. Yoshino-san is the first engineer that Toyota sent to the United States to work in this project. And he hired the first American to work for Toyota, which is called, whose name is John Schuck. So the presentation was between both of them. And the presentation was precisely saying, okay, what did you learn about Toyota? What did you learn about the Japanese culture and all these things? And part of what they were telling in this story is basically the community that surrounds the region where Toyota started. So he explained that these three had, I don't know how much you know about Japanese culture or Japanese history. I don't know anything at all personally, but I know that there were some emperors that were ruling Japan, and then they had these warlords or warriors that became the shoguns, is how they are called. So you have these three shoguns, Nobunaga, Oda, Hideyoshi Toyotomi, and Ieyasu Tokugawa. So basically these three people, this is the main warrior, and these two were his successors in that empire. They had certain specific rules, and then, I mean, imagine something similar. How many of you like, I don't watch it at all, but just to put you in context, what is this Dragons and Medieval series? Huh? Game of Thrones. Yeah. Game of Thrones. So imagine that, but with a Japanese context. You have the king, you have the ruler, and they have rules for all the people around. Some of these rules are actually the predecessors of what you know behind standardization, and where you know behind some of the rules of making signals for what is called the Andon system. Some of those principles, according to Yoshino, came from what this community had developed in the past. And the sense of punctuality and the sense of honor and all those things as well. So this is the precedent. To put you in context where that happened, everything happened in the region of Nagoya. Nagoya is known for its entrepreneurial spirit. A lot of the biggest companies that you know that are Japanese, some of them come from this region. Just to give you one name, in electronics, who do you think when you think about electronics in Japan? Sony. All right? So Sony comes from there. So Nagoya, close to the city of Nagoya, we have what is known as Toyota City. All right? That's where Toyota has its headquarters and global operations. So you can see all the operations of Toyota right here. This is the Nagoya office. And then from Nagoya you have the Toyota City there, and then these two plants right there. What do you see inside Toyota City, and what do you see in these two plants over here? First of all, how close is Nagoya and how close are the Toyota operations to the seashore? Very close. Very close. So how do you think they do their operations? They finish stuff and ship it away, right? So they're very conscious about that concept of flow and the inventories and the takt time and the pitch of the shipments. Where do these things go? Well, they go many parts in the world, but I work in the Japanese industry back home, and some of these things come straight to the United States, some of them go to Mexico, some of them would go to South America. There's a lot of operations in Brazil and I think Argentina too. They just ship everything. Okay? Not necessarily finished products. They could do parts and send the parts for assembly. All right? So, just to give you the context, that's where Toyota Production System came from. That's what drove Toyota Production System. That's why it became so successful among Toyota. So the question here is, all right, the Japanese, I don't know, tell me one stereotype you have about Japanese people.
Brave, disciplined,
Crazy.
very to anime.
They like anime, they're disciplined.
Anime.
Or Crazy Rings,
Huh?
TV shows, reality shows like really crazy.
Crazy?
Yeah.
What else? What stereotypes you have about Japanese?
They are robots.
They are robots.
Huh?
Some people say they are robots.
They what?
Some people say that they are like robots.
They are like robots. Okay. I didn't include this part of the presentation. If we have time after Professor Guilherme finishes with his presentation, I want to show you something in regards to that comment that you made. Okay? But these stereotypes about Japanese people fit with the nature of the Toyota production system. So the question here is, why should we take something that was invented by the Japanese and works very well for the Japanese and take it to be implemented? First of all, why should we teach that to you? Why should your companies where you're working should do that? It worked very well for the Japanese. What guarantee do you have that that's going to work for you guys? Let me ask you this question. How many of you consider that you're as disciplined as the Japanese? Raise your hand, honestly. There must be somebody. No one? So how do you expect that your implementation of Lean is going to be successful? So, here's a question. And remember, we covered this in the very first video conference. How do we came to know about Lean? Was it Toyota making a big marketing about it? Or was it Americans trying to look for the best method to do things? The word Lean was not even conceived by the Japanese. The word Lean was given, not even him, a student of him. So, if you talk to the Japanese back then and say Lean, they would say, what the hell is Lean? You invented it, you should know. They don't know, they know it nowadays because it's popular around the world, but they didn't know it this way. For them it was, in particular, Japanese management system. If you look at the research in the late 70s, early 80s, they don't talk about Lean at all. They talk about, probably one keyword that you can find is just in time, but they mostly talk about Japanese management systems. That's the word that they used to have for this. So, how do we expect this to succeed? According to the Japanese, well, Taiichi Ono, when he was asked, where did you take this from? He cited all of these as the origin of the Toyota production system. Not even Toyota as the generator of most ideas. He said, I took ideas from you guys. We learned from Henry Ford. We learned from all the other contributors in industrial engineering, Frederick Taylor, Eli Whitney. So we learned from all the knowledge available, we just refined it and adapted to what we have. Okay? There is one story that we heard from this Professor Yoshino, the technical engineer at Toyota, and he said that one of his experiences when they were doing stuff about Toyota, he was proposing the method to be implemented in NUMMI. And then he was discussing with John Shook being American. And he was telling him, all right, we need to implement the Toyota production system in this way. And then John Shook started asking him, I started questioning him, and he said, I don't think a lot of these things will work in America, because people in America is slightly different to the people in Japan. You know what the answer from Yoshino was? He said, if we learn to do the things that you did, such as Henry Ford, why don't you learn the things that we do? That was from his Japanese perspective. You should do it and must do it in this way. So, the context that we have is the Toyota production system. I'm not saying it's not wrong. I'm just saying there is some understanding that needs to be done beforehand so that we implement things that are going to sustain. In theory, we can look at this S-shaped curve, and I saw that Professor Guilherme is going to show it in a different connotation, but our concept is basically that we have organizations that are trying to deploy strategies. You and yourselves are trying to deploy a strategy. You're not just doing a single project. You're trying to deploy a strategy for your projects to sustain, right? So it has to be culturally sensitive. But what kind of culture? So culture evolves as the maturity of the organization evolves. If we take a look in a timeline, the evolution of an organization, we can see that, theoretically speaking, the beginning of every organization is going to be highly influenced by the culture of the context where it's being utilized. In other words, for every new company that comes to Mexico, every new company that comes to Brazil, or comes to China, or anywhere you go, in the very beginning, the highest influence over the behavior of the people at that organization is going to be the culture of the country. As the organization matures, as the organization learns, the predominant culture is going to be the one that is set by the organization, right? In other words, Toyota Production Systems can work outside of Japan. It's demonstrated to work, but it's not going to work immediately. And when that happens, a lot of organizations say, this doesn't work, and then they throw it away. You have to be patient. It can work. It's discipline that is required behind the implementation of Lean. But for that, you need to be sensitive to understanding what are the things you need to do in order to make it to this point. Why? Because every culture is different. You demonstrated that when Dr. Sonny called you. What is your perception about Brazilians? What is your perception about Chinese? The classes. Because every culture is different. The context drives every single one of your decisions and your perceptions. All right? So let's assume this. So I can show you this example. We're going to play with context. And I'm going to show you, go back to the exercise we did. So this is a $100 bill. How many of you want a $100 bill? Do you want one?
Yes.
All right. Let's assume that everybody wants a $100 bill, right? What would you do if you found one? Right outside the classroom. Huh? Grab it. Would you tell me you found $100?
Yes.
Yes? Would you invite me to dinner with the $100? What would you do with the $100? In Mexico, this was this TV show. You probably don't know guys from Mexico because you're too young. The show was called like Secret Camera or Camera Infraganti. I don't know if anybody remembers that show. So they used to do this trick. They would just leave a wallet or a bill on the street, and they would tape the people and see the reactions. And this came on national television. And you would see the ridiculous reactions from people, like people trying to grab, and then somebody, it had an invisible thread tied up to the bill. They would pull it, and then people would grab it, right? And then they would tell them, oh, you're on TV. And they would say, oh, I'm sorry, and they would return the bill. But there were some other people that would say, no, I dropped it, it's mine. And they would say, no, we put it there, there's the cameras, it's on purpose. No, it's mine. And they were stubborn to say it's mine. So, if I put this outside, would you return it or would you keep it?
Return it
To who?
you or Dr. Sonny.
If you return it to me, I'll invite you to dinner. All right, so that's the question. What would it happen to this $100 bill if you put it there? Somewhere in there. What do you think would happen? I think this is the outside of Mexico City. What would you do? What would it happen, sorry, to the bill? It will disappear?
Yes.
Why? Probably. So what would happen to the bill if you put it there?
Disappeared.
The same. It's appeared.
So, how many of you have lost anything here? While being here? No? Well, let me tell you one thing. If you have lost anything or left anything behind in this classroom, there's a very high probability that either one of us has it or it's in the lost and found with the officers there. Okay? That's only if you left it here. Why do you think from the context of the first picture to the context of the next picture there would be a different outcome?
The cameras.
Cameras? No, there's no cameras. People is different. All right, let's talk about assumptions here. Who would you assume lives here? How would you assume people live here? What would they do? What is their profession? How much do they make? They make very little?
Yeah, the minimum or less.
So can we say they are surviving? Okay. What would $100 make for them?
Big difference.
A big difference. What about here? What do you assume happened here? Would $100 make a difference? Would there be a probability of people knowing that they grabbed $100 and it's a greater embarrassment for them than what the value of the bill is? Would that be a possibility? If anybody is caught here getting the $100, do you think they would be embarrassed?
They're heroes.
Huh?
They're heroes.
They're heroes, yeah. No, not saying that everybody's like that. But the point I want to make here is the situation depends on the context. The situation depends on the environment, right? So if we're talking about lagging indicators, leading indicators, what we can change, what we cannot change, and we talk about culture being important and people the center of every implementation. So what can we change in people? What can we change when we're saying to them, this project is going to get you less overtime? Your paycheck is going to come smaller. Would you help me to work in this project so that you make less money? Do you think that's possible? It's contradicting, right? So what is the culture that you want to build? Moreover, what is the culture that you understand the people of the projects you're working at has? What is the culture that you're trying to drive? What is the environment that you want to create so that your projects are implemented and not only that, are sustained? So the idea is to create the environment around what your implementations are so that they sustain, right? If you want to drive the outcome, you want to make sure that the conditions to get that outcome are considered. If your results are just to get communication or get throughput without considering what makes that possible from the person perspective, your projects are not going to be implemented. They will sound very good, but your projects are not going to be implemented. I guarantee that. All right? And you might be confused because you might have a request from the people in the line or the nurses or whoever you're working with, and then another request from the supervisors or the people that is working with you, and another request from Dr. Sonny, and you say, who do we work for? What are we supposed to do? Who should we give in this to? Of course, if you are more conscious about your grade, you're going to be more concerned about what you tell Dr. Sonny than the company. But if you are concerned about your impression with these companies, you probably don't care much about the grade, and you're going to do a project that is worth doing for the company. And if you are working for the company, are you contributing what you know and what you have learned, or are you just doing what they told you to do? So, what is the value that you're adding to these? How did you understand the culture of the context so that your projects are sustained? So, let me tell you something. I tricked you when we did that exercise on the yellow, on the gray piece, so that we can demonstrate the context part. So I asked you a simple question. How many of you think are the same color? How many of you think they're different color? Team 1, Team 2, all right? There is something I didn't tell you.
Different images.
Huh?
They were different images.
Different? No, they were the same. They were exactly the same images. You guys on that side, majority of you said they were same color. All right? So the question that nobody asked is why this side most people thought they were the same color, and why most people in this side thought they were different color. Nobody thought about that. I tricked you. Do you know how I tricked you?
The light.
The light?
These two sides have the different, no, how to say, the light is different.
The light, okay. Anybody else knows the answer? So I cheated you. I did cheat you. Majority here thought they were the same. Majority here thought they were different. How is that possible? The answer was they were the same. That means that people in this side are blind? No. The picture was not better than the picture on this side? It was the same. So what's wrong with the people on this side?
This screen is more lighter.
Hmm?
I mean, this screen is more lighter than that one.
Could be, but not really.
We switched the
Are you less intelligent than these guys?
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, I'm not asking you because the ones that I tricked were them, because you got majority of you the answer. What was it? Nobody knows? I created the context for you to answer that way. I created the context for you to answer majority same and for you to answer majority different. Nobody thought why I divided you, right? It was on purpose. I drove, I anticipated how you were going to respond. How do you think I did that?
The ordinance was
Inception. How did I do that?